if you want to get involved, I'll put the link in the chat. And if anybody wants to get involved with it, they can get in touch with me. And Judy's room is here the first Wednesday of every month, same time, same place. And I hand it over to Susan, the other Susan.
Thank you. It gets confusing because we have several Susans involved with this. But thank you, Susan. And first of all, I want to say Mind Freedom International is shared in the hosting of the Judy's room with Love You Lead On. We're grateful to have that opportunity to work with other disability rights groups. Mind Freedom International is an organization that fights for the rights of people who get labeled with psychiatric labels. We have three main programs that I think we do. One is called The Shield, and people who have been forced interventions, coercion, committed, can invoke the shield, and there's a large number of people who will get involved, and with the individual's permission, and will advocate for their release and their rights. We also have an alternatives directory that lists some organizations and services that are not coercive and involve mainly choice. And then we've been involved with Judy's room, as Susan Fitzmaurice said, for the probably last year and a half or so. We do sorry, I forgot to shut my phone off. Apologies. So we are an international organization, and I am always in awe of the geographic diversity we have, knowing that some of you, it's very early in the morning for you, and some of you, it's probably pretty late in the evening for you. It's just perfect for me in mountain time. And when I see we also have a goodly number of people in mountain time. I also wanted to acknowledge Sarah Smith, who has set up this meeting. She works for Mind Freedom International, and she is today our person in charge of technology. And I see that we're all on, and that's amazing. Thank you, Sarah, because if left to me, there might only be 3 people on. So thank you. So that being said, it's really my great privilege to introduce our presenter today, my friend and colleague, Jim Gottstein, who is the founder of the Law Project for Psychiatric Rights, also known as PsychRights, has been fighting against forced drugging of children, youth, adults, was lead in a court case that Myers versus Alaska Psychiatric Institute, which in Alaska ruled that forced drugging procedures were unconstitutional, requiring the state to prove by clear and convincing evidence that the forced drugging is in that they have to prove that it's in the person's best interest and that there is no less intrusive alternative. Jim has also been involved in developing alternatives, understanding that if the alternatives aren't there, then kind of that decision doesn't work very well, does it? So, Jim, I met Jim when he was starting a Soteria house in Alaska, and also Choices, which was a peer-run mental health. It was the alternative to the community mental health center, basically. Jim is probably most known for subpoenaing the Zyprexa Papers and that led to a series of New York Times articles and an editorial calling for a congressional investigation. He's also author of the book, the Zyprexa Papers, which gives a firsthand account of what really happened. It's a good read, and I recommend it to you all. Without further ado, because I really want him to be talking, not me, I just want to welcome Jim and thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Susan, and thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you all for coming. As you can see, I relentlessly promote my book, the Zyprexa Papers. I'm going to put in the chat a few links that as I go through this, and I'm going to attempt to share my screen right now. Oh, there it is. Everybody see that okay? And okay, so when we put out the announcement for this, I wasn't sure this was going to be done, this report on improving mental health outcomes. But basically, that was my intent, was to go through this report. It was written specifically, and with really terrific co-authors, Dr. Peter Gertsche, David Cohen, Chuck Ruby, Faith Myers. But it was written specifically for people to use as in their advocacy. So it's it tries to be pretty comprehensive, and it has copious citations and links to pretty much all of the citations, and that's the purpose of it. And I'm just going to go through it a little bit. I kind of don't expect to get all the way through the PowerPoint. One of the things I put in the chat was a link to the PowerPoint. Uh-oh. So the layout and graphics was done by Keith Aquino, and I put his email in the chat in case anybody wants to do that. He put a lot more bells and whistles into it than I could deal with. So he had a lot of animations and things that aren't in there. But if you need someone to do it, PowerPoint for you, I think it'd be great to contact Keith. So the executive summary states the mental health system's standard treatments are colossally counterproductive and harmful, often forced on unwilling patients. The over-reliance on psychiatric drugs is reducing the recovery rate of people diagnosed with serious mental illness from a possible 80% to 5%, and reducing their lifespans by 20 years or so. Psychiatric incarceration, euphemistically called involuntary commitment, is similarly counterproductive and harmful, adding to patients' trauma and massively associated with suicides. Harmful psychiatric interventions are being imposed on people without consideration of the facts about treatment and their harms, and are a violation of international law. The most important elements for improving patients' lives are people, place, and purpose. People, even psychiatric patients, need to have relationships, people, a safe place to live, place, an activity that is meaningful to them, usually school or work, purpose. People need to be given hope these are possible. Voluntary approaches that improve people's lives should be made broadly available instead of the currently prevailing counterproductive and harmful psychiatric drugs for everyone forever regime often forced on people. These approaches include peer respite, soteria houses, open dialogue, drug-free hospitals, housing first, employment, warm lines, hearing voices network, psychotherapy, non-police community response teams, and emotional CPR. By implementing these approaches, mental health systems can move towards and even achieve the 80% possible recovery rate. As bad as it is for adults, the psychiatric incarceration and psychiatric drugging of children and youth is even more tragic and should cease. Instead, children and youth should be helped to manage their emotions and become successful, and their parents should be given support and assistance to achieve this. So I think this is the report is not a handout. It's 35 pages, not counting the bibliography. And so it's not really a handout, but I think maybe the executive summary could be. So this is a table of contents, and it's basically divided into two sections. The current mental health system is extremely counterproductive and harmful, and then voluntary, effective, safe, and humane approaches. So the first section, even Thomas Insel, a former head of the National Institute of Mental Health, acknowledged that basically psychiatry has accomplished nothing in the last 100 years. And in fact, as we'll see, it's really made things worse. Interestingly, he wrote a book a couple of years ago called Healing from Mental Illness to Mental Health. And one of the things that struck me about that book is that even though he's a strong believer in what's called the medical model, which is that there's something wrong with people's brain that causes people, I hate to say people get diagnosed with mental illness. He says the solutions, he acknowledges the solutions are not really medical. In fact, the people, place, and purpose is something that he uses in his book. And when he talks about solutions, it's pretty much all psychosocial. I mean, he gives some lip service to the drugs, but he acknowledges that they don't work. So that's one of the things about the report, is that it doesn't rely on whether the medical model is valid or not. It just goes through the facts on what's happening. And it's terrible. I mean, the rate of people on disability because of a diagnosis of mental illness has gone up 6 times since the introduction of the so-called miracle drug Thorazine in the mid-1950s. Now, I think part of the increase since 1987, from 1987 to 2013, was because of the welfare to work legislation in 1996, I think it was, that basically forced people to get on disability, get funding, and then the decrease since 2013 was because they made it harder to access those payments. But so this is not a story of success. And by the way, this chart, and most of them here are from Robert Whitaker's work, the author of Mad in America and Anatomy of an Epidemic, and the publisher of the Mad in America website, which is so informative. So what are we achieving? So the recovery rate is basically 5% in people diagnosed with schizophrenia, and this is worse than anything since before the advent of psychiatric drugs. So you can see these studies or these results, and they're all far better than what we're seeing now. And so, it just is obvious that we're doing things wrong, that we're making things worse. So, and it doesn't have to be that way. So the open dialogue approach in Northern Finland, it basically is achieving an 80% recovery rate. And so you can see, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but they have 79% asymptomatic at a 5-year follow-up, only 20% on disability, and between working or in school or unemployed deaths, 80%. So it's one of the places I get the 80% possible recovery rate. And their approach, I'll probably talk about this a little bit later, is basically not to, they really try and avoid the neuroleptics, which I use rather than the term antipsychotics, because most of it, they don't have antipsychotic properties for most people. But their approach is that really the solution is relationships with people, bring everybody that's important in a person's life together, and basically work things out. And they actually eliminated quote schizophrenia in that part of Finland, because in order for it to be properly diagnosed, someone has to have those symptoms for at least 6 months, and they were getting people through it without it. So, and then Soteria, the Soteria house had really similar results, that only 19% were maintained on the drugs during the follow-up period. I'm going to maybe talk about this a little later, but basically they also really tried to avoid the use of neuroleptics, and they had far better outcomes. I think basically, again, only 19% maintained on drugs during the follow-up period. So we see that instead of these recovery rates, again, we're getting a 5% recovery rate. And what happens, what we see is when people get off the neuroleptics, the recovery rate goes up to 40%. Well, that's, eight times better than 5%, being forced to or staying on them. But it's half of what could be achieved if they were never put on them in the first place. And so what that does is really demonstrate how important it is to try and prevent people from getting put on neuroleptics in the first place, and really all psych drugs. And I think one of the things that this raises is why does the system insist on using these drugs that have such terrible outcomes? And one of the, I'm ahead of myself. Okay, so in addition to the low recovery rate is that psych drugs lower lifespans by 20 years or so, and then neuroleptics increase suicide, sudden cardiac death, other cardiac mortality, and all-cause mortality. So again, why are we using these drugs so ubiquitously? And one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons is the clinical drug trial literature is basically fraudulent. This is a quote from Marcia Angel, the former editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, and this is talking about drugs generally, but she even acknowledges that psychiatry is the worst. She says it's these problems take their most florid form in psychiatry, and my sense of things is that psychiatry kind of led the way, and the rest of medicine is following that model. And the basically, a long time ago when the earth was new, universities, there was kind of independent research about drugs, but then the drug companies took it over, and their objective is to sell drugs and not necessarily find out the truth about them. So they design the studies to do that rather than reveal the truth. Negative trials are published as positive. Much of the clinical trial drug literature is ghostwritten. With the named author, I mean, they go out and write these articles and then go looking for prominent people in the field to put their names on them as authors. And they're not even allowed access to the data. The drug companies write up the study, and then, you know, maybe the named authors edit it some, but it's basically a fraudulent process. So, for example, actually, I should have changed that to got changed to 145. Patients who entered the trials for the newer neuroleptics died, but none of these deaths were mentioned in the scientific literature, and the FDA didn't require them to be mentioned. So that's just one of the examples of the way that the truth is just not being told in the medical literature. So anyway, so that's one of the reasons for why these counterproductive and harmful drugs are being used so much. In addition to the drugs being very counterproductive and harmful, so is psychiatric incarceration, with an astronomically higher rate of suicide. In the first week after discharge, there's a study that showed it was 102 times higher for men and 246 times higher for women in the first week after discharge. And other studies that really say the same thing, that suicides just are dramatically increase when people are psychiatrically incarcerated. Okay, so to me, an obvious takeaway from these facts is treatment should be voluntary. I mean, in addition to just the in addition to that they don't work and are harmful. I mean, people are being forced to take them, and so that's just outrageous, and it doesn't need to be so. Lauren Mosier, who is kind of a guru to a lot of us, he was a former chief of schizophrenia research at the National Institute of Mental Health, and if it's not voluntary, it's not treatment, basically. And in his career, and he had an active practice that he had never committed anybody, and that was because he formed, the relationship and would come to some kind of agreement with his patient so that they could agree on what to do, and that's the sort of thing that needs to be done, and so that just shouldn't be voluntary. It shouldn't be involuntary. And in fact, forced psychiatric interventions violate international law and can constitute torture. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the CRPD, prohibits governments from denying people decision-making authority, from confining people or administering any other psychiatric interventions on the basis of a disability, including being diagnosed with a mental illness. And this was really a phenomenal achievement. There are a lot of people that worked on it, including former president of blessed memory, Celia Brown of Mind Freedom. But Tina Minkowitz is credited with getting that done. I mean, the most influential. And it's really a crowning accomplishment. But one of the things that happened is people didn't really believe, accept that that's really what the CRPD said required, that that you just can't deprive people of rights based on where it's based on a disability, including mental illness, being diagnosed with a mental illness. So there have been a couple of clarifications and reaffirmations that is true. That's a violation of the CRPD. A lot of countries have signed the CRPD, including the United States, but the United States has not, the Senate has not ratified it. But with the possible exception of Mexico, I don't think, I mean, none of the countries have really come to grips with it and are really implementing it. And the United Nations has repeatedly stated that unwanted psychiatric interventions, including psychiatric incarceration and forced drugging and forced electroshock, can amount to torture. So and I think that's a point that can be made with, hopefully, with policymakers, is that we should not be violating international law. And the rights are also violated under local law. It varies by jurisdiction, by state and country, but oftentimes, in order to lock someone up and drug them against their will, for locking them up, the government has to prove that the person is, as a result of, mental illness, danger to self or others in the near term, and there's no, and use the least restrictive alternative, or in other words, that there's no less restrictive alternative. And for forced drugging and forced electroshock, that they have to prove that it's in the person's best interest, and there are no less intrusive alternatives for the forced drugging. I feel like I'm going too fast here. So Professor Michael Perlin, who's kind of the icon of mental health law, and he basically says that one of the reasons that people are locked up and drugged against their will, basically because of fraudulent court proceedings. There may be sham proceedings would be a better term for it. They know that the witnesses are not telling the truth, but the idea is that, well, if this person wasn't crazy, they'd know this was good for them. Therefore, we're not going to let their pesky rights get in the way, and that results in people being locked up and drugged or electroshocked against their will when they don't actually meet the criteria for doing that. We have a citation for this, but the citation is to me. But I estimate that no more than 10% of the people who are psychiatrically incarcerated actually meet commitment criteria. And I talked to, I have mentioned that to Professor Perlin once, and he agreed with that. And that's an example of people's rights being violated. I mean, people diagnosed with serious mental illness are not significantly more violent than the general population. And that's a criteria for, harm to others. That's a criteria. And psychiatrists are notoriously bad at predicting when someone who's going to be violent. In fact, no better than chance. And there have been studies on this that have proven that. And it's basically the system doesn't care because it wants to get people out of the way. And so these legal principles are just an excuse for doing that, and they are invoked even if the criteria are not being met. Same is true, even more so with psych drugs, because I don't think it's ever possible to prove legitimately that forcing someone to take psych drugs is in their best interest and they're no less intrusive alternative. And that will go into the less intrusive alternatives in a bit, but so I mean, I come across as pretty anti-drug, and I pretty much am, but I know people who find them useful, and I think they should have access to them. Adults, not children. I don't think children should ever be given psych drugs, frankly, and especially the neuroleptics, but even the stimulants and the so-called antidepressants cause huge problems. But if they, if they find them useful, that's fine. I think they should have access to them. I think they should be told the truth about the drug so they can make an informed decision about it. But even if they're not told the truth about it, they find them helpful, fine. But no one should ever be forced to take these drugs. I mean, one of the things that happens is the patient or respondent or whatever you want to call a person will say that the drugs are harmful and counterproductive, call them things like poison, and that is pointed to as proof that the person is mentally ill, when in fact they're correct about it. And of course, no one except the person themselves knows how the drugs make them feel. Children is a whole different category, and there was this critical think RX curriculum that was the principal investigator was David Cohen, who is a co-author on this report, and it was funded out of the settlement of the fraudulent marketing of Neurontin, and it consists of 8 modules. And it really, I mean, it says, well, these are how you should go about making a decision on whether you should give psych drugs to someone. So it's not categorical like this title is, but it goes through the evidence on this. And module 8 in particular has alternative approaches. Well, okay. I'll move on. So then what should we be doing instead? I mean, first off, it should be voluntary, and we should use effective, safe, and humane approaches. I'm a big fan of peer support, and that would be true peer support. I mean, there's been this set of principles that have developed that are very key. I mean, one of them is a non-hierarchical approach, that you don't have this so-called expert and then the person that's, being told what they should do. And it's been really proven to, I mean, one of the magic things about peer support is if someone's been through what the person has gone through or something similar, they can relate to that person much better, or at least it can really break the ice and establish a kind of rapport, and that's so key. But what's happened is that the whole peer support movement has gotten to be is being co-opted by the system. And then they, like they have peers in jobs where they're supposed to ensure, quote, medication compliance. Well, that's not peer support. And it's pointless to do peer support without using the peer support principles. Okay. So in one of the very successful programs using peer support or peer respites, they are, as all of these programs are voluntary. People can stay, and they're really to avoid, people who are experiencing a crisis, or can just go someplace and be safe and not forced. Typically people can stay up to 7 or 10 days. It's not clinical. It's a home-like environment, 100% staffed by people with lived experiences. And there is a video called "How a Fia House Helped Me," and there's the link there. But anyway, I put that link in the chat. And this is about 5 minutes of what is it, Marty Hatch, who was at the International Peer Respite Soteria Summit and spoke. This was in October of 2021, and pulled out this 5-minute video. And I think it really gives a good idea of what it's like to be in a peer respite and how helpful it is. So I really recommend people watch that short video if you're interested in peer respites. Okay, so the World Health Organization, or WHO, really basically recognizes all of this. And one of the they recognize that there really need to be profound changes in the mental health systems. And that's basically what this report on improving mental health outcomes is all about. It's not just tinkering at the margins. It needs to be a complete change in how we look at helping people who are having these sorts of difficulties. Okay, so like they recognize that this basically means access to education, employment, housing, and social benefits. So it's not really the focus, so much on the person's quote mental illness, but all these other things that really that people really need. And they have, I think they're called technical packages, and they have a large number of programs that they point to that are good examples of these kind of services. And most of the programs that I mentioned in here are supported by or recommended by the World Health Organization. One of the things that the bean counters, should like is that they tend to cost less. So that's kind of a selling point. And of course, they have much better outcomes. One of the important elements is housing. Dr. Mosier testified in the Myers case, which I think Susan mentioned, that without adequate housing, mental health treatment is mostly a waste of time and money. And there's been a lot of support for that. And so the housing first approach is basically to say, you just get people in housing, don't require, services, don't require anything, just, get people into safe housing. And it turns out that the CRPD also promotes the right to housing. When you ask people, what they want, they don't want services. In fact, oftentimes they're on the street because they refuse to accept, these harmful and counterproductive services. So housing is really a critical thing. And, the current system doesn't really think of that as mental health treatment. but if you want to help, want to allow people to, get through what they're going through and get better, housing is really essential. And another thing that really is important is employment. You hear all that, people are told, oh, you're too fragile to go to work, and therefore we're not going to support you going to work. Well, just the opposite is true. People want to go to work generally, and it really helps with self-esteem. It helps with social connections, and it's just very, very important. And of course, if you get people working rather than being on transfer payments, then that's a good fiscal benefit for the government. Okay. So non-police community response teams. So I think it's become pretty well known that the police are not really a great first responder to deal with people that are being perceived as having mental problems and being a problem to other people, because in truth that's really what the issue is, that people are creating problems for other people, and that's why society wants an intervention. A lot of people get killed by the police. There's even this term suicide by cop, where people deliberately get the police to shoot them. And there's and it's been happening around the country. This is one of the darlings, is to try and get the police out of responding. But in one of the darlings is this approach called Crisis Now, which has these mobile response teams, but they are pretty connected to the whole coercive system. And so the idea here is really just to, go to people and, find out how they can be helped and what they want, and rather than a coercive system. And that can resolve the vast bulk of the problems. Okay. Soteria houses, I talked about this a little bit before. The mantra there was to be with rather than do to. It was an interesting situation, because basically they proved that this was better than the hospitalization and medication or drugging regime. But the medical model of psychiatry really was taking over, and the NIMH said, okay, fine, you proved your point, study over, and then they fired Dr. Moser. But one of the things is that Robert Whitaker's Mad in America discussed soteria, and I think that was the impetus for renewed interest in soteria houses, and so there's one in Vermont now, and there's a few in Israel, and people around the country and the world are trying to get more of them going. And of course, that's what a big chunk of what the International Pure Respite Soteria Summit is promoting. There is one still theoretically in Bern, Switzerland, that was run by a colleague of Dr. Moser, Luc Ciampi, and it followed the soteria approach. And then when he retired, and they took I think my sense it has devolved into a more medication approach and more force. And I think that's really illustrates the importance of getting, this culture of voluntariness and avoiding drugs really established. I talked to Lauren once, and he told me that was, kind of his biggest problem is how to keep these things going once the founder has moved on. So, and I'll say this, well, the Promise Resource Network in North Carolina, I think, is, really doing a fabulous job. So, and people around the country and world are trying to get this kind of attitude really embedded, but it's hard. So another very successful program was a drug-free hospital in Norway. And they had this program where the government was supporting private hospitals, and this drug-free hospital was established for psychiatric patients. And it was fabulously successful, and people really liked it. And then the Norwegian government just generally decided that it wasn't going to support private hospitals anymore financially. And so this drug-free hospital was a kind of collateral damage for that. And that's anyway, so that's a shame. I talked about the open dialogue approach already, and it's gotten to be quite a bit known around the world, and as people are trying to replicate it around the world in different places. So this is something that should really be supported. And another one is the Hearing Voices Network. It turns out that a pretty large percentage of people, I think around 10%, hear voices, but it's only people where the voices cause them, problems that bring them to the attention of others, that they end up getting diagnosed with mental illness and locked up and drugged. And so this is basically a network of support groups. You have meetings, and their basic approach is to ask what happened to you rather than what is wrong with you. And people learn, and they talk about how to deal with their voices, how to live with them, and so that they don't cause them so much problem. And the World Health Organization, this is one of the programs endorsed by the World Health Organization. Okay, so then another program is Warm Lines. I mean, what is it, the 988 line that rolled out nationally in the United States? This is not that. It's staffed by, well, it should be, hopefully staffed by peers. And it's really, the key thing is that they absolutely will not breach confidentiality, and they will never call people call the police on people. And what happens is the hotlines, they advertise that they're confidential and they won't call the police on someone. But if the person talks about suicide, then they're going to call the police. And so that causes people not to want to call them. And it also means that the Warm Line staff cannot be mandatory reporters. But one of the keys to them is that they will only do things that the person wants. So they have resources that they can refer people to, but they're not going to try and force anybody into anything. Okay. And then there's emotional CPR, which was really developed as a response to mental health first aid, I think is what it's called, which is the mental health first aid really is a program to funnel people into the traditional system. And emotional CPR, eCPR, was developed by Dan Fisher, a psychiatric survivor psychiatrist who's been prominent for decades, and he wrote a book, Heartbeats of Hope: The Empowerment Way to Recover Your Life. The book itself is really quite good, and it goes into quite a bit of detail about the eCPR program. But it's basically like all these programs are, which is relationship built and just helping people, decide how to deal with their problems, and help them, get what they want. I'm just about done. Psychotherapy is, often overlooked these days, but a lot of people want it, and a lot of people find it helpful. And, and so it should be made available. It should never be forced on people. I mean, that makes it kind of pointless. And, research has shown that it is at least as effective as the drugs, and, more long lasting. The World Health Organization, there has some of the programs that they recommend are like the Friendship Bench in Zimbabwe, this Tandem Plus program in Belgium, citizen psychiatry in the French city of Trieste, the Trieste, Italy model. And then there are other programs that, kind of, the one that is in Alaska is Ionia. And to me, what it has shown is that people can come together and develop something that works for them. It may not work for other people, but it works for them. The Healing Homes in Sweden is also a very effective program. And Warfighter Advance for people that suffered, were in war and then got diagnosed, as mentally ill and given these drugs. And this is a way to, get them back from that. Okay, so that's that. And I'm pretty much open for questions.
So in the chat, I'll just jump in here. In the chat, I saw people asking for citations, but I think you covered that. That was early on, Jim. And somebody asked about anagnosia. Anagnosia, I never say it right, which is the biggest lie of anosognosia, which is the biggest lie of all. But I think you addressed that, but I don't know if we covered it all. So is there a question about that, or do you want to expound, Jim?
So yeah, anosognosia, is this idea that people, because of their so-called mental illness, they don't know that they have a mental illness. And it's a term that's hijacked from brain trauma that, it was actually, I think, in the First World War that people had really extensive brain damage, and they didn't realize it. And so psychiatry hijacked it. But the citations, I mentioned that the report, and I really recommend that people download the report. It has, all of the stuff that I said as citations to it in the report. And I think every one of them has a link, sometimes to the actual study, but at least to, like where you can buy it on Amazon or the journal article. So it's copiously cited. and those are their hyperlinks, all of them. I see there's someone asked about, can the PowerPoint be emailed? Oops, I sent it to everybody, and so and what, it's way too large to be emailed, but I've uploaded it to a website, and I just put again the link to it in the chat where you can from where you can download it.
Okay, so then there was a question about programs in California, and I lost it in the chat. And then I think we can take hands or jump in. Raise a hand or jump in.
I'll make the point. First of all, Jim, that's great. It's really a terrific report. Al Galb's here in southern New Mexico. I'm working with a group of people on creating a soteria house here. But one of the points, that strikes me I want to make is it's bad enough to involuntarily commit people to treatment, to what's called treatment. But then the treatment they get, or the attention they get, or whatever you want, the intervention they get is harmful to them. I mean, it's not effective. The average length of stay in a mental hospital is 10 days. So a person is sent to a mental hospital. They're there for 10 days, let's say. They're usually there for less than that because insurance doesn't pay for it. I'm a psychologist. A few times I have sent people to the hospital because I was afraid they might hurt themselves or somebody else, serious risk. Well, they're in the hospital for 3 days. They get medicated. Of course, as you pointed out, the medication is actually harmful to them. The medication, what the medication does, I don't know if people realize this. The medication reduces dopamine in the brain. That's what it does. It reduces dopamine. Now, dopamine is a very important neurotransmitter that's associated with vitality, creativity, life, reward. And also, as most of you know, Parkinson's disease is caused by a deficiency of dopamine. So it's not a surprise that people who get antipsychotic drugs for any amount of time are likely to start experiencing Parkinson-like symptoms. But anyway, the point is, you send a person to the hospital there for 3 days, maybe 10 days. You go to a couple of group meetings and aren't going to help them very much because it doesn't deal with their individual situation. They get medicated with a very toxic substance and they send them back out again. So, I mean, it's just ridiculous. And as everybody knows, California now is making it easier to hospitalize involuntarily people who are homeless. Well, I don't know what they're going to do. Are they going to build more mental hospitals? I don't know. Anyway.
Thank you, Al. So great to hear you. Al's my neighbor by about 100 miles. Anyway.
Thanks, Jim.
Amy's hand is up. Amy Coulter.
Hi, everybody. So good to be here. Sorry for earlier technical difficulties. Always good to hear from Al and Jim. And I just want to say you're preaching to the choir here. Current situation, family member, under conservatorship in the locked treatment facility after 3 years during COVID in the local jail. Anyways, yes, the system does harm us. I am in the process of looking how to create the alternative. I'm selling my home, my dream, and I just want to share it with everybody. So my dream is to create a tiny home eco-village somewhere where differently abled people and their caregivers and their family members or whoever wants to come, create community resiliency and self-reliance. And I think we use all of the approaches that we have known are proven to help people in a holistic manner, including a whole foods diet. But if we don't deal with the stress and the negative emotions, you know, it's not gonna. And yes, the drugs are a problem, but the way I'm dealing with my loved one is a mind over matter philosophy. Really, when you start embracing the beliefs that you are greater than the physical manifested world, that you can overcome anything in this, you know, existence, this hell on earth that our thoughts and actions are creating. We can create the world of our dreams. We can heal from these statistics that say your chances are shot. Okay, this is where I'm at. You know, I'm mind over matter, quantum physics, the world, the realm of possibility. You know, tapping into the divine energy that creates universes. So I want to invite people into that realm with me. I'll put my contact information. I am also taking right now a water practitioner, a water restoration practitioner course through waterstories.com. And the reason this is important is because we're living in a system that is devolving the environment that we depend upon. So we can expect people to lose it. Okay. And water is our primary requirement for life. Water is life. And so when we empower people, and when you talk about making people, place, and purpose, well, there is so much work and opportunity in restoring a species appropriate regenerative ecosystem, that is the work in front of us. Do the work that you love, and that is restoring the earth, beginning with my own body and those that I love around me. That includes you all. Okay. I am so thankful for this forum to share my vision, to encourage you all to just think big, because and then we need to listen to Outwitting the Devil, okay, by Napoleon Hill. It is now a podcast. Okay, when you realize that half of the atom is negative energy, half is positive, that it is so important to take control of our thoughts and emotions, people. And that's what these drugs numb. Okay. And so if we're dealing with the devil, how are we going to outwit the devil to reclaim
Amy,
our thoughts?
You know
Thank
what's
you.
amazing is that you like brought it down to the atom, and you know, I love that actually.
Praise me.
See that Jamelia wants to say something, but I also want to make a reminder that Jim started this by saying he put this materials together, and it took like a great deal of effort so that people can use it for advocacy. And I think that's what I'm hearing you say, Jim. Let's use it.
Yeah, and Amy, you made good points. And one of the things you said was preaching to the choir, and I think that's right. Here we're, you know, pretty much the choir here. But the point is to then take this and educate the rest, you know, the rest of the population, and mainly it's focused for policymakers and funders as the intended audience of the report. And Jamelia, you're on mute.
Jamelia, are you with us?
There. Now can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Excellent presentation, Jim. It was encouraging because right now here in Anchorage, I just feel we're in a dearth of finding any resources. And your presentation was good to see. There's little pockets sort of all over the world where people are doing things. And the end point that I got is everything is about relationships and our need to form relationships. But I just wanted to say thank you. It was encouraging to see that there are things out there that are happening. So thank you.
Thanks, Jamelia. And yeah, we've got to try it. The report actually was outgrowth of situation in Alaska, where the legislature asked for a report on various things, including improving patient outcomes, and number of some of the same authors, including Susan, was on this one, produced a white paper that's specifically directed at the situation in Alaska. And then we decided it would be good to have a more general one for people to use around the country and around the world. And hopefully people will find it useful for that.
And one thing I want to just comment on as I'm reading these and something, so we Love You lead on a broad-based disability rights organization. Thank you, Susan Fitzmaurice and Scott Cooper, and people are doing that. And a lot of times the psychiatric rights groups are not invited into the greater disability movement, and we have been, and that's one of the reasons we're doing this. But one of the things that I know is, it's kind of like what Jim brought up about the anagnosia. I never say it right. Anosognosia, I can't say it right. But in and of itself, it should be an easier word. That we'll just take it. Let's just take it out of our vocabulary, right? So, but what happens is somebody has a physical disability or a brain injury, which is different from what most people call psychosis. I'm not even sure what that is most of the time, but it's different from that. And then they get psychiatrically drugged just because they have behaviors, and then they get labeled like another label, like as if they didn't already have enough labels. So that's a comment I have, and I'm sure other people have questions and comments.
I thought I saw him.
I see Teresa. Teresa has a hand.
Yeah, that's me. Okay, to ask a question here.
Yes.
Yes, go.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jim. It was great to have that distillation of information. Here in New Zealand, there was a massive mental health inquiry in 2019, and a huge report came out of that with 48 recommendations. Most of those recommendations were talking therapy, soteria houses, open dialogue, all those wonderful things. And the government actually accepted the recommendations, including changes to the Mental Health Act. However, in spite of the fact that the government gave the mental health sector something like 1.6 billion New Zealand dollars, the only thing that's come out of that, to my understanding, is the creation of 3 new forensic psychiatric facilities. So clearly something went wrong there. The people whose voice was actually included in the inquiry, like there were public meetings all around the country. So the public were listened to, and some horrendous stories came out, as you can imagine. But where I came to is the level of professional capture in the mental health system. So you talked about that in what you've just said, and what sticks in my mind is it a question of, this is my question, is it a question of breaking, somehow diminishing that professional capture, or is there a need to create a parallel system, totally set apart from mainstream mental health, which is...
We need a completely separate system.
Yeah, that's where I came to, really, because of the attitude, or many psychiatrists, and the system itself has got this delusion, around what mental health and mental illness, I hate that word, is, I'm not sure. Did I make that clear? That industrial input is what bothers me, and the stigma created by the system,
Yeah, I think that that's a key question. I mean, it's hard to, clearly the people that are in charge are causing tremendous harm, and they should not be allowed to be in charge of anything. And
Yeah.
really, and but I think on a small scale, there kind of is an alternative system. I mean, I think that's where, peer support originally was, peer respites were. And there's this fabulous program, Shireen Carrico, who's my hero at this point, of the Promise Resource Network, who I mentioned before. They've created this kind of whole system. And one of the things, she is just adamant about not being allowed to be co-opted. And she's been so successful that people are coming to her, with money, and she refuses to take a lot of money that would come with strings that would basically require them to violate their fundamental principles. So that's that's a really hard thing. And I think we just have to keep pounding on people. This report was really designed for funders and policymakers, but we also need to, maybe even more important, is educate the public about this so that we get support. So, Scott, I see your hands up.
Scott?
You're muted.
Scott?
You're muted, Scott. Yeah.
You got to click here. There you go.
There you go.
I'm blind too.
So real quick, Scott and Susan Fitzmaurice were one of the kind of leading forces in the Judi's room. So thank you very much. And now you have a hand raised. Go for it.
Oh, I used to be. The last 6 months, I've been involved with a national disability history and culture collective gathering that started beginning after Judy Human died March 4th to create a national museum, some walls on the mall, but also a virtual museum. Long ways away, but one of our components to answer New Zealand's issue of parallel universes is an encrypted 3D navigational virtual space that the only way out of it is nothing about us without us. So we're working on that issue of that. I just wanted to add that to you. We do weekly work groups every Monday. Susan is always in charge of those email blasts. If you want to get on the emails, we just take little bites. I don't recommend eating whales or elephants, but we have a tech team there. So if anyone's into tech and databasing and 3D animation, virtual museum type stuff, we plod along every week. So
And it would be Susan Fitzmaurice. I just said that because we have a lot of Susans involved.
oh yes, Susan Fitzmaurice is always in the loop with the emails. I only read mine every 3 days, which kind of ticks her off.
Only when I send you an email and you don't read it.
Other questions or thoughts?
Peter?
Thanks, Jim. It was a great presentation. And I looked up briefly at the website PsychRights, and that has great material on also. I'm in a depression and anxiety support group that meets twice a week. And a lot of our members use meds. They also use counselor therapy. But they say they come to our group for belonging and understanding, which they say is very important also. I get the impression from listening to them that the mental health system has progressed in the last 20 years from when I was in it. It sounds like they get much better than it was, although still kind of flailing. I wonder if Jim could recommend a periodical of some kind that keeps track of trends in drug use, trends in alternative development, and stuff like that. A newsletter or a blog or something like that.
Well, I think Mad in America is a .org. Mad in America really does a pretty good job of bringing this stuff out. I mean, there are various, one-offs, an article here, an article there, but Mad in America, I think, does a pretty good job of keeping on top of it. But I'm certainly not the only, if anybody else has some ideas, chime in.
I also want to say, I think we had Peter B had a hand up, then Sean, but does anybody have any other ideas? Then let's go to Peter B and Sean S.
Well, I just
heard
finished.
from Peter.
Oops, sorry.
It looks like there's no video. Can you hear me?
We can hear
Yes,
you.
You can hear me, but you can't see me, right?
correct.
This is Sean. Is that true that you can't see me, right? I'm trying to get the video.
We can hear you, Sean. So did you have a question or a comment?
You just muted yourself, Sean.
Mute there.
There you
Oh,
go.
I got it.
Yeah.
There we go. How's all right? Thank you. Sorry. Hi everybody. I'm an old sort of patient of just about everybody's. But
You've done there.
I wanted to tell you I had like what was sort of just two little short things that happened to me in the state of Maryland where I was first hospitalized 3 years ago. I guess some people wanted to check in with me and see how I was doing. So, and I ended up in a Maryland state court, but it was a good day for me, actually, sort of good. But there was two funny things that came out of that. And one was there was an old army, it was an old guy that he was in the army, but I was not. But he was an old friend, and somehow the medical model came up, and he said we call it the drug dealer model because and I was like, yeah, because they're really interested in, what they really want is lifelong customers, and they were saying that's exactly right. And so they call it the drug dealer model instead of the medical model. Anyway, that's one thing. And then when I was in court that night, it was like 3:00 in the morning or something, and I said, I think the problem in the system is that there's just no incentive to cure the patient. And another old psychiatrist of mine happened to be there, and she said, no, that's not true. She immediately was offended. And I said, no, I don't mean that the people who work in the system don't want to cure their patients, because of course, that's true. There's plenty of good people that work in the system. I just mean that there's no financial incentive to cure the patient. And I don't know, it seemed to help there. I mean, I think in the state of Maryland, to me, it's just like, it's like, I don't know, it's like trying to chew through a brick wall. It's just, to me, it's pointless. I'm right now, I'm in New Mexico, outside in a mountain somewhere, hiding out near Albuquerque. And anyway, thanks for being there, and thanks for keeping on, you guys.
Well, Sean, come on down
Yeah.
and visit. I'm in Albuquerque too. But I see a comment. Why are there not more landmark legal cases that challenge the constitutionality of so many of these matters? Jim?
Courts aren't interested.
So, to me, the actual court cases are not so bad. I mean, the appellate decisions, the problem is that people's rights are not honored, that they're ignored basically as a matter of course. And that's because, I mean, I said, the people think, well, if this person wasn't crazy, they'd know this was good for them to, to be drugged and locked up. But so there's that attitude, and a lot of times even the attorney that's been appointed to represent the person takes that attitude. And in my mind, the most important thing is to get effective legal representation for individuals. I mean, I won, Susan Musante mentioned the Myers case, but I actually won 5 Alaska Supreme Court cases, 3 of them on constitutional grounds. And, in my more, I don't know, maybe realistic moments, I think that the only thing that really changed was the forms, the court forms that they use. And so, and I was, let's say that the public defender appointed lawyers lose 90-95% of the cases. And I won about half. And I think, way more than that should be won. And it's a matter of ineffective legal representation by the lawyers, I think, is more important than the appellate decisions, which really aren't so bad in terms of the rules. I mean, under this idea that people can't be drugged against their will unless it's found in their best interest and there are no less intrusive alternatives, I don't think anybody meets that criteria. And like I said, for psychiatric incarceration, I don't think more than 10% actually meet the criteria. So that's, in my mind, that's where the problem is.
So, I think that the fact that you got that language in is brilliant, because nobody really does meet that criteria, right? It's just brilliant. And I see Amy Coulter has a hand up.
Dawn was first.
Who'd I miss?
John.
Okay. Don, then Amy.
What? Is it me? No.
No, we had Sean already. You said
Oh,
Sean
sorry.
or Don.
Yeah.
Did you say Sean or Don?
No, I thought I saw Sean's hand up before mine. I'm sorry.
He didn't take it off. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
So you're next. Thank you.
Well, a couple things, people who have been on these drugs for a long time, and they don't want to be off them, as we all know. The moment they get free from these locked settings, my experience has been they want to come off them immediately, quickly, which I think is highly dangerous. And it creates violence, I believe, and psychotic withdrawal, if I'm not mistaken. I believe Peter Bregan talked about that, coming off of these meds. Anyways, this idea of how to support people off of the many different drugs, including the sleeping pills, not the neuroleptics. So what do you call the barbiturates? Anyways, that this is a component of creating a safe space, is acknowledging that if people don't want to take these drugs anymore, there has to be a protocol for helping them with that. So it's a complex issue, and offering. I'm thinking of particular my loved one in particular, and I do believe, like Jim says, they shouldn't. He doesn't meet the criteria for not being able to care for himself with the right community support. Otherwise, it's true, he couldn't care for himself. But anyways, my point is, how do we, this is rhetorical, I'm not looking for answers to it, but it just needs to be considered when we hope to offer alternatives to the forced drugging situation. Yeah.
If I
Which
might,
is-
I'd like to comment. Not everybody, there are very few psychiatrists who understand or work on helping people get off the drugs. And now I'm going to do a plug for a New Mexico psychiatrist, and I don't think he's on. He might shoot me for this, but Marcello Movigliano, and he has a clinic primarily to help people get off psychiatric drugs. It's a very small thing.
So, and then there's also the Inner Compass Initiatives Withdrawal Project, I think. And I think they're quite helpful.
Well, say something more about that.
What's that, Jamelia?
Say something more about the thing you just talked about. Tell us what it is.
Well, it was started by Laura Delano, a psychiatric survivor, and so I think it's maybe someone can Google it, put in the chat. The Inner Compass Initiative Withdrawal Project, and they I think have it's kind of, they have a lot of information, and I think they get together and support each other and things like that. Other people may know more about it than I do.
I'm not hearing anybody who knows more about it, but what's the reference again, Jim?
Yeah, so I'm going to put it in the chat. The
good.
withdrawal project, or the Inner Compass project, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so I see Teresa has a hand raised.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful and important point about having some facilities for like a managed drug withdrawal. I investigated this myself and found a couple of programs like the Road Back and the Harvey's Daily Essential Nutrients. Harvey seem to have a fairly comprehensive, I think they're based in Canada, and they have a pretty comprehensive system where they do mentor, and as well as these nutrients which support the brain's adjustment to lowering the meds. Such a fraught process, but people have successfully come off meds through these programs, and I think that would be a real strength to have that type of thing. Somehow have a clinic that in the mainstream that has a supportive team, wrap around support for people who are willing to take that step.
along with that, I just included 2 YouTube videos that I think are important to considering that diet is critical and that diet can play an important role in helping people. I know that sugar, and of course, all carbohydrates and even too much meat can convert to glucose in the body. But the amount of sugar our society is consuming is causing brain damage. Okay, it literally is. And it's proven. This is not me just spouting, being a health nut or anything. So we have to recognize that my family member is addicted. He is constantly asking for sugar. And it's a feedback loop. So I think that's important to consider when we provide alternatives for people holistically.
Thank you. That's great.
Yeah. If I could just comment, Jim, one of the things I recognize in this whole conversation, not just in this forum here, but just generally in the conversation around psych rights, and it's hard to know how to put this, but we've got what I see is we've got 2 paradigms operating here. We've got the paradigm of the medical model, which is still holding sway and hugely powerful. But then we've got the paradigm of being human and allowing people to make, it's not allowing, but recognizing the right for people to be autonomous in their decisions regardless of what's happened. So what I understand is the key word here is intervention. And so a bunch of people think that they can impose interventions on someone. And it's a paradigm in its own right. That's what the medical model does. It's an imposing interventions, like I know what's right for you stuff. And so it's like, so who's in this conversation? I'm not sure I'm making myself very clear here, but if there's no choices, so at the moment with the current model, there are no choices. It takes a miracle to find a choice that is healthy. And so what I see you doing, Jim, which I really admire, is that you're using the legal process to say, hey, you guys, we have a constitutional right to choice, and you've taken that away. But what I recognize is that everyday people who care so much end up imposing upon the individual their view of what they should do. So somehow the individual needs to reign supreme. It's a question of how to achieve that, isn't it, really?
Thank you, Teresa. And I want to say, Jim, and we've got a couple of hands raised, but I want to, when I first met Jim, he had a presentation called the Transformation Triangle. Maybe you don't want me to bring that up, Jim, because he's sitting back.
No, that's fine. I'll
It's
put a
perfect.
link to it.
It speaks to what you just spoke to, Teresa. And then after Jim responds, we got Scott Norman and Scott Cooper, I think.
So one, I'm not good at multitasking. So one of the things, I mean, one of the articles we cite in the report is, actually it's by David Cohen. He writes on, it's on Mad in America, that basically the coercion is what society wants. And that's why psychiatry is valued and is given the power, because they want these troublesome people, taken care of, get them out of the way so they're not causing trouble. So it's an inherently disingenuous system, where they say they're doing it, we're here from the government, we're here to, and here to help you. But that's not really the goal. The goal is to get troublesome people out of the way. But we can, I think, getting people to understand that people can get through, this and get better, and they don't need to, I don't know if I really like that term, get better, or, but get to a point where, they're not having so many problems in life and not creating so many, problems for other people, that's, and have, a fulfilling life, that message really needs to get out to the public. And that is actually the key thing for bringing about system change.
Yeah, I like that.
Thank you. And as I said, I wanted to point to, so he talked about when Jim did the transformation triangle, and I'm trying to remember it, it's been a while, but it was like there's strategic litigation, but you kind of also have to have, I forget what the third one was, but you kind of have to have alternatives. What are you going to do if you litigate somebody out of the regular system? Where do they go? Well, and again, I'm going to say Jim has worked relentlessly in his life to, yes, use strategic litigation, but also to develop the alternatives. And I kind of got to go to Scott Norman and then Scott Cooper, if I'm watching this right.
Yeah, I wanted to say in terms of diet, I've been screaming about this for a long time. It was a hot button issue decades ago, and around the end of the 80s into the early 90s, it faded as such. I grew up, my behavior was affected, but also, and I think this is more common than is understood, the physiological symptomatology that I experienced was unspeakably bizarre and unspeakably agonizing. I could see the signs of this in my mother. I believe I picked up the problem, in utero before I was born, in her womb. The fact is that when we overemphasize mental illness and do not look at physiological problems that can be affecting us, we're empowering the system. It's as if all the energy we direct against the system, we already lose a percentage of it. I found diet crucial. Even now, you look in my cupboard, it's not like other people's. And as I say, I believe that my mother suffered a similar syndrome to mine and passed away. And I think that the two aspects that we should really look harder and continually look at diet. And yes, you're absolutely right about sugar, but that's not the only factor. But you're absolutely right about it. A woman who commented, I'm losing names lately I remember concepts better. My health is suffering. I've also stated that because I will not knuckle down, well, actually, even if I did, there would be no guarantees, none at all. But I can't access proper housing. My health is suffering because of a bizarre juxtaposition as to where I've had to move. I had to move 500 miles to access affordable housing because housing is reserved for consumers of mental health system in the mental health system in Philadelphia. That's not legal. That's a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Ironically, I was homeless. I couldn't get my diet properly, but I could get the exercise I needed. Now that I moved here, I can get the diet and not the exercise. But if we looked at dietary and exercise factors, I think that I'm going to go out on a limb here, but this is not, I sound like I'm a crazy individual who knows nothing sometimes. Maybe I'm a crazy individual who does know some things. I research and I analyze my own experience. I think we could eliminate, conservatively speaking, 35% of the dysfunction associated with what's labeled mental illness if we looked at those factors. Because while we're fighting the system directly, as I say, every time we allow the very paradigm they've created, that this is in your head, whether whether we oppose the drugs or not, I think absolutely the drugs should never be given to children. They ruined me. They destroyed my chances. They worsened a physiological problem so that and again, it's not on topic here to waste time and talk about the specific symptoms that have kept me from holding a job or getting an education. But they're very real. Ms. Buzzati, that's right. You said some very profound things. Thank you. Thank you.
Rarely does anybody say that to me, but thank you.
Oh, really?
No, he wasn't talking, he wasn't referring to you.
Oh, I thought he said.
Yes, Ms. Buzzati, that you pointed out that people who have been labeled mentally ill.
Singing me.
I mean,
So-
I've got some problems with, as many old radicals do, and I've had my worthless, miserable, wasted life in immediate and direct danger 3 times and once in indirect danger over civil disobedience. So don't tell me I haven't put any investment in.
So I am waiting
What I'm
for the
saying-
DSM to have a new diagnosis of CD, civil disobedience.
I'm
But I
waiting for
really
somebody.
appreciate your work.
They already have that. They do. Oppositional defiance or something.
Oh yeah. My nephew got
But
diagnosed.
I'm waiting for somebody to sue the shit out of the DSM.
All right, that's a job for Jim Gottstein. But I want to make sure we get Scott Cooper has some words.
All right, may I?
For a while. But thank you, and I'm sorry you had what happened to you.
Let me just say this: I'm preparing a document. People can reach me on Facebook, or I put my email to try to get myself out of here. I'm going to be 70 years old in November, but being a stubborn person, I would like to go another decade or so, and I can't do it here. And the only other thing I want to mention, it should chill you, because I've been whistleblowing on certain people from the far left and certain concepts and practices. I get a call from the state police. They got a call that I need mental health intervention. All right. And I believe my apartment may have been broached. Antifa's involved. I'm not fantasizing this. If anybody's curious, I put my email. I may be KRAZEE, but I'm not STOOPIDD. I'm not irrational. So if anybody wants to, you got my email there. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know Scott Cooper's been waiting a long time, so I'm gonna I thank you, man. And Scott, go for it.
Hey y'all. I was been multitasking. I'm just gonna put something in the text for anyone that's interested in. We're packaging a $600 million national museum for the mall, along with a $33 million virtual museum over 7 to 10 year planning sessions right now. I'm going to put that in the chat. We have work groups for the virtual museum every Monday. And I broke it down into, I guess at the beginning of this meeting, we had a fan of people, persons, and places. So, and they only let you put in so much in the chat. Hopefully this will fit. There we go. There's the purpose. And here's the people. and all are welcome. We're working on a database called the Peerverse, which is encrypted, peer-to-peer, separate operating systems, blockchain, as one of our storage components to the virtual museum. So it's a nothing about us without us security archive. And then everything we release to the cloud, we contact contributors to the encrypted site and ask permission if we can release that to the cloud. And then they have the traditional archiving. But anyway, thanks for doing what you all are doing. And we just continue to march forward.
And
But-
Scott, I'm so glad you're back with us.
I'm at 75%. They still got big plans for me.
Well, you used to be like 112, 50, 100, 300%. So you get a break. I see that your good colleague, Susan Fitzmaurice has a hand raised. Susan, what's going on?
I want to expand on something that you said, and that's I'm going to go back to my own son's diagnosis. He was diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, and I spent a year and a half trying to confirm the diagnosis, tried different medications, ran around doing all kinds of stuff, and then I decided it was okay. The DID was okay, and he was okay. Once I did that, so many of the issues that were present during the years, I was running around looking for a psychiatric solution, disappeared. And what I realized, what he needed more than anything, was acceptance for who he was. And the fears out of him basically disappeared. I used to keep locked doors and medication on hand because I was terrorized by him. But when I learned to accept who he was, all those extremely horrible negative behaviors, I know that that's not the case for everybody, but I think that too often we take people who've got mental health issues and we exaggerate them and medicate them and make them worse than what they ever were. And what they really need is to sit by them and hold your hand. You're okay. You know, do this better.
Thank you. So other thoughts and comments? I personally have to get off, but I think, I don't know, Jim, when you need to get off. I know we got Sarah. Susan Fitzmaurice is always available to us, which I love. And some people couldn't hear you, Susan Fitzmaurice. Your sound is a little hard for us to hear. But I think I got the gist of it. So hopefully some other people did. So other thoughts, I'm going to probably sign off. I have some family stuff going on here at the moment that I kind of go attend to. But everybody stay on who wants to forever, right? Very good.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to leave here shortly. So if anybody has any, questions for me, now's the time.
I'm going to ask a question. I get to do that, right? Jim, what's your story? Why did you do what you're doing?
Oh, well, in 1982, I got in a situation where I didn't sleep. Long story short, there's a video where I talk about this. Anyway, I ended up jumping out of the second floor window in my underwear in the middle, about 1 a.m. In Alaska. So it was light, got hauled to the hospital. and was told I would, basically I was mentally ill, would never get better. Those that believed I was a lawyer said I would never practice law again. And I was lucky to have escaped being made permanently mentally ill by the system. So that, pretty much gave me a different purpose in life.
Well, I'm sorry that happened to you, but I'm grateful also because we.
You know what? I'm not sorry it happened for me. I think it ended up being a good thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm grateful for it. So, but I didn't have to experience it. All right, so I'm gonna scoop it. Y'all can stay on. But I do want to say once more, thank you, Sarah, because Sarah Smith have totally put this together, and she's made the video happen. Susan Fitzmaurice, love you, lead on, and Scott Cooper, who I know you had to drop away for a little bit, but you're back, and I'm so glad to see you. And of course, used to be my neighbor, Jim Gottstein, and I always took comfort that you were my neighbor. If I had a legal issue, I'd just walk up the hill.
Jim Gottstein all the way.
What?
Never, I was just trying to pull up this link to a video.
Okay.
Escape from Psychiatry, Jim Gottstein's story.
Okay, that's good. So I would, if I had like something I thought would be like a legal thing, I'd just like walk up the dirt road to Jim's house and say, Jim, what do I do about this? So I know Jim on a personal level, but honestly, more just you're like my hero in so many ways. So everybody, thank you for coming. I'm going. Y'all stay on as long as you want. I'm not controlling this thing. And thank you, Sarah. And Scott Cooper.
Y'all can stay on as long as you like.
Susan, your voice is muffled.
I know, I don't know what's going on with that.
It's a little better now. I'm gonna head out too. I put my email in the chat. Everybody feel free to write. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you for doing what you're doing. March 4th.